Greetings, everybody. Thank you for watching this particular video, which is the next in our long series on studying the biblical calendar. My name is Andrew Gabriel Roth, and I run One Faith, One People Ministries. And for those of you who have been watching the previous videos, you know that this is a series dedicated to unraveling all of the secrets of the original biblical calendar as envisioned and lived in by the people in the Bible that we know today. So that Adam had a calendar, Enoch had one, Noah had one, and Moses, of course. And that's where we're at right now. So this is The Walking Dedicated Men, Part 8. Moses Reimagines Genesis. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So the title for this teaching, Moses Reimagines Genesis, may seem a bit of an odd choice, but there is a fair amount of reasoning behind my choosing to word it that way. When we last left this series on the biblical calendar, as revealed by the real biblical people, Joseph's time in Egypt saw a tremendous influx of new calendar information. But as we also saw in the other videos, the Egyptians did not learn their calendar on their own. According to the first century historian Josephus, a great Jewish historian, the Egyptian calendar arose from them being taught first by Adam and Seth and later by Abraham. And I consider Josephus' history to be genuine, of course. So, even though Moses learned much of the calendar that he would present later in Egypt, he was basically in that process taking back to his Hebrew people the calendar that they had before they went into Egypt, long before they went into Egypt, as a matter of fact. So that being said, what do I mean by reimagining Genesis? Well, I'm simply pointing out an obvious fact. There is a difference between the calendar data in Genesis being revealed incrementally, progressively, to people like Adam and Enoch and Noah and so on, and the man Moses getting one big massive heavenly download to write it down. In other words, Adam may have gradually learned his calendar or what to do over a period of centuries, whereas Moses, he's on top of the mountain writing down all the words of Father Yah in his book and being given direct revelation of everything. And that's what we see here in the scripture. And Moses wrote down all the words of Master Yah, that's Yah being the simplified form of the name of Yahweh, or God, and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And we read about that in Exodus 24, verse 4, and Matara, just in case you're wondering, is my translation. Okay. Here's another reference. And it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished. So Moses is writing all these laws in a book. That Moses commanded the Levites, which bore the ark of the covenant of Master Yah, saying, take this book of the Torah and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of Master Yah, your mighty one, that it might be there or may be there for a witness against you. And that's again my Matara translation, Deuteronomy 31, 24 through 26. But really any standard translation that you guys might like, whether it's King James, whether it's NIV, NASB, Jewish Publication Society, is going to read almost exactly the same way. So here's my point in all of this. As Moses gets his download, I believe the calendar he experiences is a bit different from what went before him. Again, this is one massive download at a fixed point in time versus a gradual unfolding of application and experience. And to be sure, Moses has all the information he needs on everything that went on before him, both plain history and deep esoteric mysteries and patterns. But he also gets, in the bargain, new insights and new commands on how to keep time that nobody else had. Perhaps the most obvious example of the fresh insights and new commands that Moses gets is found here. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe. Moshe is, of course, his real Hebrew name. I sometimes will use Moshe instead of Moses. Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is, of course, the Hebrew name for Egypt, saying, "This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you." Now, that's from another version called The Scriptures, 1998, Exodus 12, 1 through 2. So as we saw in the earlier videos, at least for those of you who had been watching the earlier videos, Adam, Enoch, Noah, and all the rest kept a calendar that began in the fall. Before I continue from this point, I just wanted to say something real quick. I know that a lot of folks like to watch this series in the middle because, oh, I have an interest in learning more about Enoch, so I'm going to watch that video, or I have an interest in Moses, so I'm going to watch this one and skip the others. I think that's fine, generally, but if there are some concepts here that I go over that seem a bit foreign, you might want to refer back to the earlier videos. However, in this particular case, when we're dealing with this chapter, Moses Reimagines Genesis, we're kind of hitting the reset key. And if you hadn't watched the other videos, this is sort of a good one to get acquainted with the calendar. Because basically what's going on is some of the best parts of the previous incarnations are here, and other fresh insights and slightly different ways of doing things are also here. But it will give you a very good overview of where the calendar that I personally use, that we at One Faith, One People Ministries use to keep our festivals. Because it's not on the rabbinic calendar, and it's not a solar calendar either. It's the original biblical calendar, and this is a really good video to give sort of a solid introduction to how that works, sort of a broader view. So let me return then to the virtual lecture here. So as I said, Adam, Enoch, Noah, and all the rest kept a calendar that began in the fall. Now Moses is directly commanded to literally turn that schedule on its head and reckon and balance the year from spring. That fact alone will necessitate Moses to come up with new strategies and processes. Now sometimes people ask me, why, Andrew, do you say the original calendar ran fall to fall? Well, it's clear from Exodus 12, which we just quoted, that running spring to spring was the new way of counting. The old way of counting is obvious from fall to fall in a number of different situations. For a real in-depth analysis as to why, you might want to consult the Walking Dedicated Men video, The Two Calendars of Noah. And I believe there's 2 videos on that. And look at both of those. That will explain exactly how we know that the flood basically was an event that happened in the fall. One of the really easy ways to know that is if you'll remember that Noah sent out the dove and it returned with an olive leaf in its mouth. Well, when we look at the chronological references that, okay, on the in the 10th month this happened, in the 11th month of this day this happened, and so on. When we subtract, we know when olives basically bloom. We know when the time of year the dove would have probably had to have had that beak in its the leaf in its mouth within about 4 to 6 weeks, because you have to account for the waters of the flood drying up and receding from the mountaintops, and then how long it would take for the olive leaves to recover in the more dried out soil and bloom. And when you do that and you subtract the 11 months back to the flood, that event had to be in mid to late summer, and therefore the flood in the previous year would have been in the fall. But there's a lot more reasoning than just that. I'm just saying this is how we know that the original months ran fall to fall. Most people will say it's very clear it switched spring to spring, but they will say, I'm not quite sure, Andrew, why you are so insistent that the older system had to be fall to fall. It has to do with the timing of Noah's flood and other agricultural clues that are in Genesis, some of which we will review here again, so bear with me. But staying on this point, the switch to spring from whatever you think the older system was will necessitate Moses to come up with new strategies and processes. And this fact brings us to an interesting side note, I think. Someone from last year wrote and asked me the following question. Andrew, if this calendar idea of yours is correct, why hasn't it been seen before? Okay, well, my first answer is, I believe it has been seen before, but for various reasons, it was kept secret. Okay? And that's a very long story, and, a lot of the other previous 7 videos sort of explain this bit by bit. But there's another reason. And the other reason it was not publicly picked up before, and this is just my opinion, is that it requires a change in thinking to see that is really, really hard for many to do. Please don't misunderstand me, though. I'm not talking about anything to do with someone's intellect or maturity. It's not about intellect, and it's not about how long you've been in the faith walk. It has to do with your training in what I call embedded truth. Now, by training, I mean, of course, specialized, disciplined study to get good at something that we are not naturally gifted to do. You may, for example, have the IQ of a genius. Maybe your IQ is like 160, like Albert Einstein. But you know what? If you haven't gone to medical school, I'm not going to call you my doctor. You need training in addition to your intelligence and maturity to be my doctor. And that's what I'm talking about. This is a matter of practice. Embedded truth, or what I sometimes also call long thoughts, are thought exercises about the scripture that look at many levels of meaning, and this is important. I want to highlight this. None contradicting the scripture's plain truth. If any interpretation, however cool looking, however sexy, contradicts the plain meaning of the word, throw it out. And we have to go through steps and not skip steps to get to this level. But this type of discipline takes practice and focus. It's sort of like playing 3-level chess, and it's not done quickly. But again, as I just said, practice makes perfect. I say these things not to recruit or start a movement or anything, but rather to share with you just how amazing His Word is. No matter how smart we get, His Word will always be ahead of us. It will always be smarter. And how that Word speaks to all peoples at all levels. And some teachings are harder than others, and some teachings are only meant for some people and not for others. Yeshua, the Messiah, taught that. And sometimes what is unclear today may become clear tomorrow, and that might be 20 years from now, that tomorrow. Everything is possible. So with those thoughts in mind, we need to see how what was revealed to Adam and Enoch previously takes a different turn when Moses receives it and begins writing about it. This is because what we saw before was from a particular point of view. Again, the point of view of Adam and Enoch as they get bits of calendar insight. But that point of view has, by definition, now shifted. And this can be a bit hard to see the difference, but we will begin with a series of examples to demonstrate parts of this. And we begin with this: the 2-witness rule. The most basic and important rule underlying the calendar. We read here, at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall he that is to die be put to death. He is not to be put to death by the mouth of 1 witness. 1 witness does not rise up against a man concerning any sin that he commits. At the mouth of 2 witnesses, or at the mouth of 3 witnesses, a matter is established. Deuteronomy 17 verse 6 and 19 verse 15 from the scriptures, 1998. Now, we're used to thinking about this rule as applying to judging capital crimes or very serious matters in the law, and this is, of course, quite correct, not taking anything away from that idea. But what about using the same two-witness rule with regards to cycles of time? This may not be a familiar linkage to some of you, but it is an important one. Because after all, our days, our weeks, our months, and years are said to be born and die. So if they are being born and being dying, why wouldn't they have witnesses for them? And the fact is, in nature and in the calendar, we always have at least two witnesses for any time cycle's birth and death. Let's start with the Hebrew day to see why. The Hebrew day has these witnesses to tell us that it has died or ended. What are the witnesses? Here they are. Sunset, darkness, and the stars come out. Now, specifically for witness number 3, rabbinic tradition tells us that 3 twilight stars should be seen, if possible, to end the Shabbat, a Sabbath, or other important day like a feast. I believe this tradition, and it is a tradition, is a fragmentary memory of an older scriptural process that involves the coming out of many stars, if they can be seen, as a witness to the day ending. That's why they're called twilight stars, by the way. But if it's cloudy and you can't see those, that's fine. Sunset and darkness will work fine. We can always tell, or almost always tell, unless the weather is super duper extreme, when the sun sets. And it's not that hard to notice darkness. Now, the same 2+ witness rule applies for the week, since that is merely a collection of 7 days. So when Friday, day 6, comes around, wait for sunset and darkness where you live, and right after that, the Shabbat begins. Then Saturday sunset, the Shabbat ends, and a new week begins. And once more, the same is true for Hebrew months. And yes, I mean both solar and lunar Hebrew months. We will see later how Moshe carried over the arrangement of solar months that were first developed by Noah. You know, it's a little bit of an interesting situation. If you look up the word month or months in the Torah text, in the Old Testament, the earliest mention of a month is for the flood in Genesis 7, verse 11. Prior to Noah, they were not counting in months, they were counting in weeks. And again, the first 3 or 4 videos about that in terms of Adam's calendar and Enoch's calendar will bear that out. Okay? Then when Noah comes along, he basically develops the solar month. In any case, talking about this arrangement, okay, of solar months that was developed by Noah and then carried on by Moses, this arrangement fixed 12 months to 30 days each. So 12 times 30 is 360, just like the number of degrees in a circle. And at the end of every 3rd month, there was a remembrance day for each of the seasons. So there were 4 seasons, and after every 3rd month, you would have this remembrance day. And that would make it, the calendar, a total of 364 official days. Now, I say official days because, as we will see later, and as we went over in the earlier installments, that's not the real end of the year. You need other witnesses to balance that 364-day system into the actual 365.242187-day year. Okay? The point, though, about the solar months, and we'll be getting into that calendar architecture in greater detail, is that the solar months were 100% fixed in their lengths. Each solar month was always 30 days long, and at the end of every 3rd 30-day month was a remembrance day. So because that figure is fixed, sunset and darkness witnesses worked fine to establish when one month ended and the next one began. So, for example, if you know that you're in month 1 and month 1 is always going to be 30 days long, then when the 30th day comes along and the sun sets, you know month 1 has ended and month 2 has begun. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So for the solar months, this is really easy. But the lunar months are a bit more of a complicated situation. The lunar months died and were reborn through an intricate choreography in the heavens, and quite a lot of witnesses involved with this. Let me explain. The first witness was a kind of a herald, a messenger telling us the month is about to die, but this is still attached to the current month or the old month, and it's called the waning crescent. This is the last sliver of the old moon before it disappears, which it will do at the end of every month. The next witness is the conjunction. That's when the moon, the sun, and the earth form a straight line every 29.530588 solar days. This is when the moon disappears. I'll get into a little more detail than that. Like darkness for ending the day, and by the way, all of Father Yah's cycles must begin and end in darkness. The reason is Deuteronomy 4:19 through 22 tells us that we are not to bow down to the sun, moon, and the stars. This prohibition against not worshiping the heavenly bodies is reflected in the calendar, that our calendar cycles from the Bible, they actually begin when the sun, moon, and stars get out of the way, so that we're not following after them to declare the time. Okay? So in any case, as I said, like darkness for ending the day, the period of the dark moon at conjunction, which is so-called dark because its form is obliterated in the blinding light of the sun for about 14 to 38 hours in a given month. This is a sign that the old lunar cycle has died. It is a misconception to say that the new moon is shrouded in darkness. Technically, it is shrouded in sunlight. This is simply because at the end of the 29.5-day cycle, it has come into a straight line with the sun, and the sun's rays are blasting the moon so much that it cannot be seen from our position on Earth. And that can be as little as 14 or as long as 38 hours in a given month. Okay? And then you have to make sure, well, let me get to this. The conjunction is attached to the old month and tells us it's the last day of this month, folks. When you don't see the moon, after 29.5 days, it means this is the last day. Okay? Then, like any other Hebrew day, that last day, conjunction day, will end on sunset, and that sunset will end the lunar month. This is where we get the rule: sunset after conjunction. Okay, is always the time of the Hebrew new moon, Hebrew new month. We have a lot more information on that at One Faith, One People Ministries. There's the 4 calendar laws and also Philo in the new moon and several other calendar teachings on the website. You might want to check that out. See some of the free materials that are there and subscription materials that are at onefaithonepeopleministries.com. And if you have any questions about some of these teachings, I have a couple of PowerPoints that I might be able to, depending upon the situation, email you back. My email is onefaithandrew, ONEFAITHANDREW @gmail.com. onefaithandrew@gmail.com. If you want to find out more about some of these little basic calendar teachings we're talking about, let me know, and I will send you a PowerPoint, which is actually locked in a PDF. And if you want to find out more about becoming either a monthly or annual subscriber to onefaithonepeopleministries.com, you can write me for that at that email address as well, or check out the website. But in any case, the conjunction day, the last day of the month, will end at sunset. That will end that lunar month. Now, at that sunset, which marks the start of a new lunar month, sometimes we will see a waxing crescent. or sliver at evening. And sometimes we won't. Here's the trick. Either way, whether we see the sliver or not, the new month has already started. Now, I know that some of you hearing me say this, they're going to be like, wait, that wasn't what I was taught. That's not what I understand. In part, that's what these other calendar teachings are for, is to show the biblical case for this. But also let me continue, and I'll show you where I'm getting this from generally. The problem with the waxing crescent is we don't see it always on day 0. When we finally see the waxing crescent, it can be as little as 0 and as long as 3 days after the new month has started. So if that is your new moon, that moon is not new, it is 10% old in that situation. That doesn't mean the crescent isn't a witness. Don't get me wrong. The crescent is an integral part of declaring the lunar month. My difference of opinion with the way this is usually taught is it is a backwards herald that tells us the new month has already started. Backwards being the key word. It's not forward only witness that says, hey, the month is just beginning the second you see this. And that is what is sometimes, in my opinion, wrongly taught. I understand where the misconception comes from, and I understand why in certain Hebrew root circles that's fairly popular. But that doesn't make it right. The scripture consistently defines the new moon as a dark moon, and that evidence is in a teaching called the 4 Calendar Laws, if you want to find out more about it. But for now, let's stand with what we have. We have 4 witnesses to the ending of the lunar month, which is my main point. If I go too off on a tangent, it'll take hours and hours going through the whole moon stuff. So let me just make my overall point. 4 witnesses to the ending of the lunar month. 1, the waning crescent. 2, the lunar conjunction. 3, sunset after conjunction. And 4, the waxing crescent. And you know what? We're still not done with witnesses because we have 1 more. The 5th witness is the math. This is another long story that I'll have to defer to another time. But here's the headline. Over the centuries of careful observation, certain rules will be discerned about how to tell if a lunar month will end at either 29 or 30 days. Because the lunar month is about 29 and a half days long, sometimes it'll be 29, sometimes it'll be 30. These rules will then be turned into math averages, which the longer the data set, the more lunar months you got, the longer the years and the decades and so on, the bigger the data set, the more accurate the math behind it. For more information on how one such system used in ancient Egypt from 3000 BC actually, which was inherited by Moses, and how it could predict lunar phases accurately over a 25-year period, this is the video that I did on that for the Walking Dedicated Men. Okay? So the Egyptians had 25-year lunar cycles. They could accurately predict any phase within that cycle. Meanwhile, just understand that I believe that system the Egyptians employed circa 3000 BCE was originally done by the Hebrews. Now, they weren't called Hebrews even yet. They were called, well, in my system, they're called the elect. The first 19 generations from Adam to the first 20 generations between Adam and Abraham, basically. Abraham becomes the first Hebrew. In any case, we need to move on now to the year and its witnesses, the 2-witness rule for the year. In a nutshell, the year ends when the sun completes its circuit and returns to where it started. And this 0 point is what we call vernal equinox, the start of spring. Now, the vernal equinox is detected in several ways, such as the sun rising east at 90 degrees, setting west at 270 degrees, and so on. That's a much more longer technical story than I can give right now, but a lot of those details are in the previous videos. And certain stars also rise and set in precise ways to let us know that spring is here. In biblical times, just to use one example, we have the Pleiades cluster, which kind of looks like an arrow-shaped shovel, and it would set earlier and earlier in the night as the winter was ending. So maybe in January, the Pleiades would set around, say, 9:30 p.m. Maybe in February, it's by 8:30 p.m. But maybe by March, as March is wearing on and spring is coming, the Pleiades will set before the sun does. And within 1 to 2 days of vernal equinox on either side, that shovel would go under the horizon. It would basically be hanging under the horizon, and then the next night it sets so early in the afternoon that when the lights go off, you don't see it. That's because the shovel was perceived by the ancients to have gone into the earth to be a heavenly sign. Now's the time to put our shovels into the earth and plant. Many ancient cultures knew the Pleiades and similar stars could predict the seasons. And that, by the way, includes the Hebrews. How do I know? It's in their scripture. This is why the Pleiades is mentioned in Job 38:31, for example, as bringing in the season of spring. Can you bring out the constellation in its season? The point is, though, between the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the signs in spring crops and agriculture, there were plenty of witnesses to call the year. Next up, though, we need to see how all the witnesses actually work together to make the most accurate and beautiful calendar ever known. And yet, the instructions behind that calendar are so simple. They can be summarized in a single line of scripture. Genesis 1:14, signs, seasons, days, and years. If you understand these fully, you understand everything you need to know about how this calendar worked. Let's begin with the actual text. Genesis 1:14 through 19. And Elohim, Hebrew name for God, of course, said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years." We'll be defining each of those. "And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens, to give light on the earth." And it came to be so. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars. And Elohim set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning, a 4th day. That's my translation. Now, the Jewish historian, 1st century historian Josephus, confirms this text, saying that the sun, moon, and stars are for keeping the seasons on time. This is what Josephus says. On the 4th day, he adorned the heaven with the sun, the moon, and the other stars, and appointed them their motions and courses, that the changes of the seasons might be clearly signified. And while the standard rule of having 2 witnesses or more to establish a fact still applies, in this case, some witnesses are more powerful than others. There's a hierarchy involved, such as we read in Job 38:32 through 33. Now that previous line that's not here, again, is, can you bind the cords of the Pleiades, right? But here's what Job says. Do you bring out the constellations in their seasons? In their season, do you lead the bear, which is the great bear, with her sons? Do you know the laws of the heavens, or do you set their rule, this is the important point here, over the earth? What is their rule? The heavens. The heavens rule over the earth. And here's another place. Thus says Yahweh, the heavens are my throne, the earth is my footstool. Where is this house that you built for me? And where is this place of my rest? Isaiah 66:1, the scriptures 1998. So which has more power? The heavens that are his throne, or the earth that is his footstool? And that's why Yeshua, Messiah, said, He who comes down from heaven is over all. Heavens rule the earth. Therefore, sky signs, stars, sun, moon, outrank earth signs, barley, and other agricultural products. And this is, not understanding this is one of the most divisive issues in Hebrew roots today. When people want to take a barley, which is an earth sign, and elevate it as the start of spring, which is a star sun-based process. If you want to say that the barley outranks the sky signs, you're wrong. The scripture says no. And that means sky signs must give permission by their orbits and cycles for the earth signs to come to pass. You don't get barley without the sun doing its job. We also saw in Job 38:31-32 that the stars bring in the seasons first, and this is in conjunction with the sun's help. The sun, of course, as we know, is also a star, but the sun has a different role than the other stars because the sun is to rule the day, whereas the stars and the moon rule the night. And the sun, in its turn, outranks the moon. This is because it is called the greater light, or Me'orot Hagadol, in Genesis 1:16, which rules the day. Now, granted, in Genesis 1:16, it doesn't directly say that the sun is the greater light and the moon is the lesser light, but the Psalms, in about 3 places, clearly identify the sun and the moon as the luminaries, with the sun as the greater light, Me'orot Hagadol, and the moon as the lesser light. Now, this word gadol, great, greater, is not just about the greater magnitude the sun puts out with its light, but with the sun's superior rank over the moon. That word gadol is speaking to rank. That's why you have the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, outranks a regular priest. And in Exodus 18, verse 11, Moses' father-in-law Jethro exclaims, quote, "Now I know that Yahweh is Gadol, greater than all the gods." Does he mean Father Yah has a greater light output than the other deities? I don't think so. Jethro clearly means that Father Yah is more powerful, has greater authority than any pretend pagan deity that he might have come across in Midian. So as Father Yah outranks the false pagan non-existent deities, so does the sun outrank the moon. And the final and most specific mention of calendar hierarchy is in the book of Revelation. We read here in 12:1, "A great wonder was seen in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars." So let's have a top-down review, shall we, of this woman in Revelation 12. And we'll do it this time going from highest to lowest. Crown of 12 stars, which is a wheel, the wheel of stars, I wrote a book by that name, is above her head. She's clothed in the sun, moon at her feet, and of course the earth must be below the moon. Now the order is official. Stars, sun, moon, earth. The other important aspect of signs, seasons, days, and years is that they must always be in that order. When I would teach this on the road and in front of fairly large crowds, I would get the audience used to saying the phrase "in that order" every time I said signs, seasons, days, and years. And I would work in that phrase like 20 times. So next we're going to talk about signs, seasons, days, and years, and everyone will go, "In that order." It must be in that order. Okay? In other words, your season can't start unless your sign for that season approves. And your days don't count forward unless the season approves. Now, I'm talking about the first season of the year, spring. Once that is anchored, the rest naturally follows. And your year doesn't end unless the days in that year approve. Now, at this point, I imagine some of you may be asking yourselves, how does all of that approval process work? How does a day approve? How does a sign approve? We're going to try to explain. And I think the answer will emerge gradually as we begin and continue to define our terms according to the Scripture. After that, we can find out more about how all these elements work together to call out the cycles of the year. So let's start with signs. A sign or an oath usually refers to something seen. It literally means something close to banner, ensign, flag. However, and this may be surprising to some of you, a sign can also be perceived in other ways other than just by seeing it. In Judges chapter 11, the way a person pronounced shibboleth, whether it was shibboleth or sibboleth, was a sign if they were friend or foe. If they got it right, they lived. If they got it wrong, they died. In Exodus, all the plagues, several times, were called signs and wonders, right? So you got your hail and your, the hail with fire rather, and you've got your, the water turning to blood and all that. But you also have the plague of darkness. The plague of darkness was a sign because darkness, in a way, can also be a sign. Though the darkness was also felt, no one could see it. The sign was that it occurred in the middle of the day. So something occurring out of its expected time is a sign. So in this case, the darkness was a sign because it occurred at noon. Okay? But darkness is also a witness and a sign because, well, let me explain. What happens is we can see that the darkness is coming on. That is visual. And even though we may not see anything once darkness has fallen, we know that it's there. And so things, as I said, occurring out of their expected times are signs. Also, both the sun going down and the darkness following are signs. As I was just trying to say just now, we do see darkness in that sense, or see it coming on. We may not see anything else inside of it, but it is still a sign. And so is the math. Math is a sign. All feasts in the Torah, in the Bible, are preceded by various numerical counts that tell Israel when to celebrate. In other words, you have to count 50 days to get through the Omer count to have Shavuot or Pentecost. And you have to count it from a specific event. And so counting is a sign, therefore math is a sign. And this brings us to our next category, seasons. And we're going to be in this category for a while. The term Moedim, this is the plural form, the singular is Moed, is used in Genesis 1 verse 14 to mean seasons. And there's another Hebrew word that we'll get to later that also means seasons. In either case, this means a group of time characterized by similar climate and agriculture. As we saw in the earlier videos, Adam and Enoch counted in 26-week periods of time, and that cut the solar year in half. 26 is the value of Father Yah's name. Now this gets into a lot of Hebrew and that we've also gone over before. Basically, in ancient Hebrew, the letters were also numbers. Father Yah's name starts with a Y, which is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Therefore, the Y equals 10. The H was the 5th letter, so that's 10 plus 5. The W or V, depending upon who you talk to, third letter has a value of 6, and the second H a value of 5. 10, 5, 6, and 5 equals 26. So Adam and Enoch would count the numerical value of Father Yah's name by weeks, because to count 7 days, 7 was the number of perfection when the Sabbath came. So 7 times 26, right? And the 364-day pattern that we discussed here and elsewhere presented a perfect number to approximate the seasons by math. This is not by observation. It's not by looking and seeing if the crops are in or whatever. This was by math alone, but then math would be compared to observation. Okay, so 364 divided by 2 was 182. Okay, so what, some might say. See, but 182 was 26 weeks, 26 times 7. And then you divide 182 in half, and you get 91 days or 13 weeks. It's those 13 weeks that equal a season. Therefore, 4 times 13, 52 weeks, equals 364, equals 4 seasons in the year. However, we also know from astronomy that the actual year is not 364 days. It's 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 45 seconds long. And by the way, I do not subscribe to the theory that somehow the year was shorter, either 360 days or 364 days, and then an asteroid hit the Earth somehow in 800 BC. And then, I mean, there's absolutely no proof that that happened. And there's strong proof that all ancient cultures understood that the actual year was 365 days and change long. So once these 52 weeks or 364 days run out, they need a series of signs to let them know that a new season of spring has begun, and then they will start their numerical count all over again from that timing. So let's go deeper. Genesis 8:22 tells us the 4 broad categories of seasons, and it puts them in a very particular order that's important to pay attention to. Seed time, fall, which is when we plant our barley crops for the following spring. Harvest, which is spring, when we gather what was planted from last fall. Summer, the season of heat. And winter, the season of cold. In addition, each one of these 91-day, 13-week seasons has an astronomical marker, which is usually called in Hebrew Tekufa. Now, I may, at the risk of repeating myself too much, because I have a feeling I'm going to as we go through this, the term Tekufa has 2 separate applications. Technically speaking, Tekufa is referring to the turns of the year, which is to say spring and fall equinox. However, once you begin a count from either the spring equinox or the fall equinox to start your year, you're going to naturally fall into your solstices that mark the halfway point between each of them. Those solstices technically are also Tekufa in Hebrew. However, they are not the type of Tekufa that balance the year. Only the equinoxes, whether they're counting Adam's old way or Moses' new way, only the equinoxes anchor the year for math and counting purposes. So sometimes when I use this word Tekufa, I'm talking only about the start of spring and the start of fall. And other times I'm talking about, as I'm about to talk about, Tekufa in a broader context that includes the summer and winter solstices, which is what I mean here, the astronomical marker. Today, as I said, we call them equinoxes and solstices. But as I just said, and I knew I would be repeating myself, so I warned y'all, it is the equinoxes that set the year, and the solstices follow along. Let's go deeper. The order given in Genesis 8, verse 22 is also very important, as I mentioned a little earlier. Notice the seasons are not grouped chronologically. It's not winter, spring, summer, fall, but instead they are grouped in pairs of type. So have you noticed that? So they are not in chronological order, they are in sort of a classification order, so that you have the 2 equinoxes grouped together, seed time, harvest. And then what is the temperature like between fall and spring? It's going to be cold and then heat, right? And then you group the other way through solstices, summer and winter. Then the final group in Genesis 8:22 is day and night. And that's a clue for how to actually do the math, how to count the timings. See, even though the Hebrew day runs from sunset to sunset, it was evening and it was morning, day one and all this, the math used in the calendar balances from the middle of the Hebrew day. Since the Hebrew day runs sunset to sunset, the middle point is sunrise. And that's what you see here. Day and night shall never cease. So let's define some more terms. The scripture calls equinoxes turns of the year by two words. And this is sort of the narrower definition of tekufa. This narrower definition happens in either spring or fall. And there it is, tekufa. Coming around a circuit at the completion of the year, finished circuit of the sun. Psalm 19, verse 7. Very important. But the other word for Scripture identifies for equinoxes. And I believe for this word, it only refers to equinoxes, returning or completing a circle. And that is teshuvah, the return of the year. And you can see those references here from the Scripture. Sun completing a circuit as well, completing a circle, completing its orbit. So tekufah can refer either just to equinoxes, and sometimes it is hinted at as being a broader category for the solstices, whereas the second word, this one up here, teshuvah, only applies to the start of spring and the start of fall. And this is what we call the Enoch circle, and what that is all about. Now, if you're not familiar with the Enoch circle, that's probably because you didn't see the video on the Enoch's calendar revelation where we had it there before. Don't worry, I'm going to show it here again. And this time, some of the technique of that Enoch circle has been altered by Moses himself. And I'll explain. As we'll see in a moment, the Enoch circle is a ratio of days to seasons. Enoch is the only person in Scripture who lived exactly 365 years, one for every day of the solar year. Further, the ages of Enoch's son, which was Methuselah, and his grandson, which is Lamech, when they each had their firstborn, is also part of the calendar math. In other words, there are three generations in Scripture: Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech, that are each showing a way to think of the 365-day year by seasons and by math. But there's kind of a catch. The catch is that Adam and Enoch's system is really key to the 364 official days of the year. And the 365th day, like Enoch's 365th year, is what I call the time of dying. This is a slight but noticeable shift in the way this math was originally used by Adam and Enoch. In other words, and I don't want to get overly technical here, but what I'm trying to say is that if Enoch didn't die on his birthday, then he lived at least 365 years and died before reaching his 366th year. And that is how I think that system was understood by Enoch, was that it's between 365 and 366. But when Moses gets this download, he's applying the math a little differently and is looking at 364 official days and the day of dying 365. So not completing 365. That's a bit of a long discussion that I will defer for a later time. But I believe that the Scripture and the math back this up, because of Moses' unique mandate from Father Yah, But in both scenarios, the main idea is constant, i.e. that the official count of the year is 52 weeks or 364 days. The 365th day will always be the day the year dies in this system. Again, just like Enoch. Whereas before, they knew that the year technically died between 365 and 366. Okay, so after 365, but before 366. But here, it is the 365th day that is treated as the day the year dies. Now, there are only two possibilities that can happen when day 364 ends. Either the next day in Moses' system, in the new system, is New Year's Day, or a leap week is added, and that leap week is added in between the years. That leap week, which is added at the end of 5 years, generally speaking, that leap week balances the calendar, just like February 29th balances our calendar. We'll explain a little bit more as we go through this. Either way, the year can said to be over after the 364th day. And as we will see later, and as I just alluded to above, the balancing of the current year to the next one is always done between the years. This is very important to understand. The Egyptians also had a similar system where they balanced their calendar in between the years. It took scholars centuries to figure that out, and they were totally in the dark without understanding that. The advantage of it being in between the years leaves the numbers constant and intact for each individual year. And that is how Enoch's circle of 365 balances from 364. So here is the circle of Enoch. No, there's more to it than this. I'll be adding to it as we go through here. Okay, so here you see a circle divided by four seasons, north, south, east, west. The circle of Enoch is based on references to Enoch, Genesis 5:22 through 28, and the seasons that we've gone over in Genesis 8, verse 22. And as we also saw, Enoch lives 365 years, 1 year for each day of the year. Summer, when the sun is the solstice, summer solstice is when the sun reaches its highest point. Winter solstice is when the sun reaches its lowest point. And this is what we call the Methuselah, or man of the dart. This is the spring-fall line. Methuselah is Enoch's son. And it is Methuselah's age when he has his son that is part of the calendar math. He's called man of the dart, so here's a man making an east-west arc, throwing a dart. Okay, that's what Methuselah means, man of the dart. Now, Methuselah is 187 years old when he has his son Lamech. That's why this is the Methuselah spring-fall line, because 187 is the number of days from spring to fall equinox, inclusive. You have to have the actual day of spring equinox on this east-west line. That is a total of 187 days, including the spring equinox and the fall equinox. Okay? So my point is that Methuselah's age matches this number of days from spring to fall. That helps divide the Enoch circle by equinoxes. Next, though, we need to take the same circle of Enoch, but now we're going to divide its 364 days by another method. We're not doing it by equinoxes, but by pure math, dividing it precisely in half. Again, remember those 26-week cycles we just mentioned? 26 times 7 is 182. And 182 is exactly 1/2 of 364. And it looks like this. Again, same circle. We've got some other features in this one, though. Circle of Enoch, as we just saw, Genesis 5:22 through 28 and 8 verse 22. Again, just a quick reminder, Enoch lived those 365 years, one for every day of the solar year. Here's your summer, here's your winter. But look at this. This is now the Lamech line. This is Methuselah's son. Lamech's name means strong youth. And notice I say it is a math line. because it is dividing by math. Lamech lives to be 182 years old, and then he has his son Noah. And 182 precisely divides this circle in half. 182 in the previous system was also speaking to the number of days between solstices, but here it is used in a different sense. For more information, see those previous videos. It is through this template, then, that Moses renders, or rather reorders, the Hebrew months and organizes the seasons. In order to do this, he carefully analyzes and develops approaches to deal with the instructions in Genesis 1, verses 14 through 19, and in 8, verse 22. Again, what we call, here's putting the whole list together. Say it with me: signs, seasons, days, years, seed time, harvest, summer, winter, cold, and heat. However, what most don't realize is that these seasons have each been divided into thirds for a total of 12 slices in that circle. Now, many scholars have stated that at least some of the months that the Jewish calendar uses today come from either pagan culture, like Babylon, or from pagan worship itself. So, for example, one of the Hebrew months is called Tammuz, and Tammuz was a god long before it became the name of a Hebrew month. That certain Jewish month names come from late Babylonian origins, Nisan, Tishri, and so on, is undeniably true. However, a lot of the scholars that say that true statement also often make a corollary statement, that is to say that we have lost most of the original biblical month names in the process of adding these pagan ones. And that, my friends, that is clearly a lie. The fact is, Scripture has preserved all of the original month names. Before seeing why, though, I need to give you all a bit more background. What I am about to describe here is unusual, to say the least. Most of us are used to thinking of months as either solar or lunar. A few of us might even think of months as being linked to fixed stars. But this is different from all of that. For while it's certainly true that the sun, moon, and stars all have roles to play in the series of months, technically speaking, these eth, or ethim, which eth is another word for season, are based on agricultural signs and cycles alone. Basically, when a crop is shown to be ready for harvest, then one observes the solar or lunar month that is closest to it, and the month becomes associated with the agricultural crop. Over time, an order of 12 months will become completely associated with the seasonal marker that it occurs in. So, for example, the first month of spring is the time of the barley harvest, which relates to late March to late April. That's the full totality of, the first month. And the barley harvest will happen in that first month. Okay? And actually, I understand that, Abib, which is the Hebrew lunar month, will can occur as early as March 7th or March 8th. But I'm talking not about the lunar cycles per se right now. So this is more solar months. We'll clarify this as we go forward through this. Now, that these 12 agricultural months are given in Scripture is undeniable, as we will soon see. None of them at all have been lost to history. One compelling proof of these agricultural months, again the term is eth, the plural is ethim, is found in passages about David and Solomon. The key to seeing this fact is to understand that if the Hebrews only kept a lunar year, they would have to add a 13th lunar month every 2 to 3 years to keep it in sync with the seasons. This is because the lunar year is 354 days and about 9 hours long. I believe it's 8 hours, 52 minutes, and a handful of seconds. that lunar year, or 12 lunar months, is about 11 days short of the solar year. So in 3 years, the lunar count will be a month off from the solar count. So if you simply cycle 12 lunar months in a year, which is kind of how the Muslims do, right? That's why it's their holidays keep occurring at different seasons of the year. What was your first month of spring rapidly becomes your last month of winter, and it'll just go backwards through the calendar like that. Therefore, if the Hebrews only used lunar time, it would be inevitable that in some years you're going to have 12 months, and in other years you're going to have 13. And yet, time and time again, we see the Hebrews exclusively base their seasonal architecture on a 12-month system every year. So regardless as to what they're doing with the moon, and the moon is part of their calendar calculations, this proves they also had a solar year. Again, the scripture tells us this is the case. Let me show you. 1 Chronicles 27, verse 1. Now this is the enumeration of the sons of Israel, the heads of fathers' households, the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, and their officers who served the king in all the affairs of the divisions which came in and went out, here it is, month by month, throughout all the months of the year, each division numbering 24,000. Okay, so you had a 24,000 division coming out month by month. But look at this. When the count of these divisions ends in 1 Chronicles 27:15, the number of months is forever fixed to 12. We never get a 13th division. Furthermore, the number of men for each division, 24,000, that's no coincidence either. That's also related to calendar. 24 is the number of hours in the solar day, is times 1,000, the number of generations that Father Yah shows mercy to. Exodus 20, verse 6. The same pattern of having only 12 months in every year is applied with Solomon when he becomes king a little later. We read Solomon had 12 deputies over all Israel who provided for the king and his household. Each man had to provide for a month in the year. Not surprising that each deputy and each chief became associated with a month and that month's crops. In fact, this makes sense because that means that each deputy would become an expert in the agricultural slice of time that he is always assigned to. You don't want to have people who don't know how to deal with a certain crop trying to develop that for the nation. And once again, the way the system worked, was once the season of spring was called, the agricultural signs throughout the year, what we call the Ethim, that's what scripture calls it, would occur in their fixed sequence like a never-ending choreography circle, given 12 discrete acts before recycling and starting all over again. But there's more story to tell here. The concepts of the Moedim and the Ethim are so inextricably linked that sometimes they serve as synonyms for one another, and sometimes they mean two separate things. An example of them being synonyms. Genesis 17:21, Abraham was told, at this Moed, that's the singular of Moedim, next year, Sarah will have a son. Again, Moed is appointed time. At this appointed time next year, Sarah will have a son. Okay. Now we need to look at how that prophecy is confirmed shortly thereafter. The messenger said, I will surely return, here's the word shuv, at this time, at is ki, ka, ka'eth, next year, ashuv, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Genesis 18:10, NAU. The small phrase has huge calendar insights. A previous example, 17:21, called the matching season in the next year Moed, an appointed time. And here we see the word shuv, which means return, used two different ways. The messenger said he would shuv, return, during the same eth, or time or season in the following ashuv, this is referring to the year. Okay? It's basically saying the next cycle, the next time this cycle matches is going to be in the following year. Now, normally the Hebrew word for year is Shana, like Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. But in this case, the word for return is being modified to mean year. It's the same root, meaning when the sun, this is why the word return can refer to a time of year. When the sun, shuv, returns to where it is now. So look at where the sun is now, and when it returns to that point is the following year, and that's why ashuv means year. Then in Genesis 18:14, we are once again told that the moment the sun returns to this point, shuv, is also an appointed time, moed. This proves that sometimes eth and moed are referring to the same things. Other times, however, there is a distinct technical difference between these words, as we will now demonstrate. Here's a wheel. Imagine this wheel is a solar year. The hub here we will call eth, season. The spoke that's attached to the hub here we will call moed, an appointed time. Notice that the moed, in this case I'm using Passover, is attached to the eth, the barley season in which it occurs. And then when the hub moves, so does the spoke attached to it. So the appointed time is the spoke. The appointed time will move when the hub it is attached to moves on to another season. Then the next spoke will come into alignment. In other words, each moed is attached to an eth in which it occurs. And the eth of the moed, and this is important, never changes year after year. So in other words, your first month will always be about barley, and so on. Also, in some cases, the months mentioned have more than one name. As we will see, often this is due to the fact that the same 30-day period, roughly 30 days, or actually 30 days, may have one overall event followed by a secondary or minor event that happens a couple of weeks later, but still in that month. Other months have no harvests, but are just hot, cold, rainy, and so on, and they are named for their weather. Now, these names also come from all parts of the Old Testament or Tanakh. Many are in Genesis, others come as late as Zechariah or Esther, and others are in between. However, the point is, none of these agricultural names has changed in all of biblical or Tanakh history. Because in the original Hebrew and Aramaic dialects they came from, those dialects always had those words. So in other words, to use just one example, the name Kislev may only be in the book of Zechariah, which is fairly late. But the concept of what Kislev means in terms of the seasons, that was understood all the way back to Adam, because in the language that's in the scripture, it has always had that term. So just because it only occurs in a later book doesn't mean it wasn't understood in an earlier time. With those thoughts in mind, let us learn the real names of the months and seasons before they got corrupted. The first tekufa, or season, using the broader definition of tekufa as, equinoxes and solstices, spring harvest. Main name is Abib, or ripening. Again, remember that before Moses, they were doing things counting from the fall, but Moses was commanded to count from the spring. And spring's name, Abib, means ripening. Those are the scripture references. The later event is called the barley harvest, which happens in the middle of the month. Ketzir ha-Seorim, which is mentioned in Ruth 2, verse 23, and that is the first original biblical agricultural month, or F. First F of spring. Next, main name for the second month is Ziv, or splendor of flowers. That's in 1 Kings 6:1, 2 Chronicles 3:1 through 2. That's the month that Solomon began building the temple. The later event was called Ketzir ha-Dagan, the grain harvest. That's mentioned here. It is our second month of spring. You got one more month in this season. Ketzir ha-Kittim is the wheat harvest, and it's mentioned in Genesis 30, verse 14, Exodus 34:22, Judges 15:1, Ruth 2:23, 1 Samuel 6:13, and 12:17. That is our third month. This will later be called Sivan, right? But Sivan does not occur in the scripture. So this is its original name, Ketzir ha-Kittim. Similarly, with the second month that we just saw, Ziv is the original name. It will later be called Iyar, but Iyar does not occur in the scripture. Okay. Now, the later event of this third month, from Exodus on forwards, this is the end of the 50-day counting of the Omer. And on the 6th day of this month, the wheat harvest, Ketzir ha-Kittim, ends. That's the agricultural tie-in. And this brings us to the second Tekufa, summer. First summer month is simply called summer, Kayitz, or sometimes this is rendered as summer fruit. Genesis 8:22, Psalm 32:4. This is also one of the names for the summer solstice. This is our fourth month from the start of the year. The later events that happen in this month, time of figs and later grapes, you can see that in Leviticus 26:5, Isaiah 18:5, and 24:13. Deuteronomy 8:8 gives the order of the crops that relate to this very well, and you can also see these other scriptures here. This is all in the month of Kayitz. Second month of summer is called Tirosh, or new wine. The word for new wine is different than yayin, which is the general Hebrew word for wine. New wine is a sweet wine. It is mentioned in Genesis 27, 28, and 37. There's many other biblical references to this. The best way it's rendered in the Hebrew is in Hosea 2, verse 9. It is our fifth month. Later, this will be called Av. Okay. The first two summer months are times of trouble. These are the days when the Hebrews worshiped the golden calf. This is also the month when it was later called Av, when both of the temples were destroyed. Now our third summer month is simply called heat. Chom. Remember we said cold and heat, summer and winter. This is the month of heat. Genesis 8, verse 22, also mentioned in Jeremiah 17, verse 8. Our sixth month, this will later be called Elul. It's the hottest and driest time of the entire year, and when it was called Elul in Nehemiah 6:15. So here's a case that a later name has actually made it into the scripture. In Babylonian Aramaic, Elul means to search for. That may be a reference to the fact that you might be looking for your produce and you can't really find it because it's too hot. It's not, your grapes, for example, might not be ready for harvest yet. And then we get to the third Tekufa, which is seed time or fall. And that, what is now called Tishri, was originally called Ethanim, the steady flowing of water. This is when Solomon dedicated the temple, 1 Kings 8:2. It is also what we call seed time, and it's also called the turn of the year, fall equinox in Exodus 34, verse 22. Later events, grape harvest, also known as the Feast of Ingathering or Sukkot, is associated with this month. You can read about them. Leviticus 23:34, Deuteronomy 16:13, Isaiah 24:13, Jeremiah 48:32, Ezra 3:4, and Nehemiah 8 verse 14. I read these verses out loud so that when I talk about these definitions that may seem strange to some of you, at least you'll know that I'm really trying to do my homework and line up not just one scripture that you can go, well, maybe it means that, maybe it doesn't, but multiple witnesses to establish these definitions. Okay, moving on. The 8th month is called Bull, which means flood. That's mentioned in 1 Kings 6 verse 38. It also means produce. It's an interesting dichotomy in meaning. The dual meanings of flood and produce combine for a picture of steady flowing water that creates bountiful late fall harvests. Bull will later be called Heshvan, but we call this month Bull because this is literally the month that the Noah's flood happened. And that's also a long story that's in the previous videos. Moving on to the 9th month. Kislev, thickening of crops. Okay, it's referring to the thickening of crops after heavy rains. The root is also related to Kesel, which is the Hebrew name for the constellation of Orion that shines a lot during this month. Kislev is mentioned in Ezra 10:9, Nehemiah 1:1, and Zechariah 7 verse 1. It is our 9th month. Later event, Hebrew scribes changed the vowel pointings on the Hebrew so that it doesn't sound like the Hebrew word for Orion, but more Kisel, which is fool. This was to sort of make fun of its mythical origins and say, no, we don't deal with silly Greek myths. This is the month foolishness. It is also the month of what will later become Hanukkah. It was in Kislev that the temple got rededicated after the altar was defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a mad pagan king from Syria. And after he had been kicked out and after the temple practice had been forbidden for 2 years, they rededicated the temple on the 25th day of the 9th month of Kislev. And that 9th month also was witness to several other important events as well. And this brings us to the 4th tikkun for the 4th season, winter, or Horef. Well, the first month of winter is in the scripture, Tebeth, which means muddy season or heavy rains. You can read about that in Ezra 10:9 and 16, and Esther 2 verse 16. Our 10th month, as I said, called Horef, winter. Genesis 8 verse 22, Psalm 74:17 is the time of the winter solstice. Okay? Tebeth will also be associated with the later rains. Deuteronomy 11:14, Jeremiah 5 verse 24, Joel 2 verse 23. Okay? When we're dealing with these agricultural seasons, depending upon if there is a leap week or not, you're going to be fairly close to these seasonal markers. You won't hit it exactly. And so it's important to bear that in mind. There will be times when the lunar month Kislev will cross the winter solstice. That sometimes happens. That's why Hanukkah and Christmas sometimes occur, within a day or so of each other. But I'm not talking about the lunar months. I'm talking about the agricultural months. In any case, Tebeth, as I said, becomes associated with the latter rains or later rains. Deuteronomy 11:14, Jeremiah 5:24, Joel 2 verse 23. Second month, Shavat, destroying rain, mentioned in Zechariah 1:7, our 11th month. Later event, also a time of difficulty and grief. It is Shavat. It is the 11th month that Moses died. We are told that at the opening of Deuteronomy 1:3, and the entire book of Deuteronomy is basically that whole day. That's a long story. But we know that the entire month of Shavat, because Moses died on one Shavat, Israel mourned him 30 days, which meant that entire month. Deuteronomy 34:8. The full moon of Shabbat, called Tu B'Shabbat, is, by the way, in Israel, it's more of a secular thing than a religious day, is known as Jewish Arbor Day, the New Year's Day for trees. And then the last month was called Kor, cold, in Genesis 8, verse 22 and 37, verse 9. The later name, also in Scripture, Adar, which means darkness or eclipse, in Canaanite Aramaic and in Babylonian Aramaic. It is the last month of darkness giving way to the season of light. It is mentioned in Ezra 6, verse 15, and the book of Esther in 3:7, 3:13, 8:12, 9:1, and 9:15 through 21. It is our 12th and final month. Later event, the deliverance of the Jews in Persia, called Purim, happens at full moon. One more little note on this, because we obviously ran out of months. Then when the last days of Kor or Adar are completed, the Hebrews will wait for the next seasonal signs to let them know to start the harvest count all over again. But before that happens, the seasons will have to match the math that Moses inherited and later enhanced. And that unit will also count in the third part of the calendar. So we did signs, we did seasons, and now it's days. Each agricultural cycle we just named and went over is counted in a fixed number of yamim, or days. Therefore, in order to see the full system, we're going to go back to the start of the Hebrew solar year, time of vernal equinox, in the first month. So the signs have come and proclaimed that the first season, which is spring, has begun. So next we got to count our days, and we got to count them this way. For purposes of simplicity, we'll assume we're going to be going through a series of hypothetical years. Our hypothetical year 1 will start on Wednesday, March 26th. That is not a random date, although it seems like it is. I'll explain later why I picked it. And we will further assume that a leap year, which is to say, in our Gregorian calendar, when we get a February 29th in it, this year of 2016 that I'm taping this had a leap year in it, happens in year 4. Otherwise, February has 28 days. And each of our 12 months will only have 30 days in them. However, and this is important, at the end of every 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th month, there will be a remembrance day in between the months. So we talked earlier about how we have calculation days in between the years. These are in between the months that represent the commemoration of the equinoxes and the solstices. Also, while the Hebrew day always begins at sunset, as I said earlier, the way we track and balance the solar year are primarily by sunrises in the middle of the Hebrew day. So here we go. Month number 1, and I'm not doing this for all the years. I'm going into this level of specificity for year 1, and then the rest of the years will be a lot easier. So bear with me, please. So we're just going to say that in year number 1, month number 1, Abib begins Wednesday, March 26th, and that's our first year. Abib runs 30 days, ending on April 24th. Month 2, Ziv, begins the next day, ends on May 24th, 30 days. All of these have 30 days. Month 3, Ketzir HaKatim, begins on May 25th and ends June 23rd. Then on June 24th, and this is again year number 1, we have our Remembrance Day, because it's the end of the 3rd month for the summer solstice. The actual solstice would have happened a few days earlier. Then we proceed with month number 4, Kayitz, summer. That begins on June 25th, ends July 24th. This is followed by month number 5, Tirosh, begins on July 25th, ends August 23rd. Then month number 6, Home or Heat, begins August 24th, ends September 22nd. And look what comes up, another Remembrance Day for the fall equinox. And that's actually on the actual day that fall equinox sometimes occurs. It'll be the 23rd or 22nd. This is followed by month number 7. Ethanim begins on September 24th, ends October 23rd. Month 8, Bull, flooding, begins on October 24th, ends on November 22nd. Month 9, Kislev, begins on November 23rd, ends on December 22nd. Then December 23rd, we have our Remembrance Day in between the months for the winter solstice. Month number 10, Tebeth, begins on December 24th, ends on January 22nd. Month 11, Shavat, begins January 23rd and ends on February 21st. Month 12, Kor, or later Adar, begins February 22nd, ends on March 22nd. And March 23rd is the Remembrance Day for the vernal equinox. This count will then end year 1, our hypothetical year 1, on Tuesday, March 24th. The day of the week matters here, and the reason is that the sun, moon, and the stars were placed in the heavens on day 4. We read that from Genesis 1:14 through 19. Scripture calls these collectively, which is to say the sun, moon, and stars, luminaries or meorot in Hebrew. And the 4th day of our week is from sunset Tuesday to sunset Wednesday. In the math, though, as I've said a few times, we're counting from the middle of the Hebrew day at sunrise, which is Wednesday morning, Wednesday dawn. We will also count our weeks from Wednesday to Tuesday, what I call the luminary count, because it's commemorating the 4th day when the sun, moon, and the stars were set in the heavens. So when year 1 started on Wednesday, March 26th, 364 days later, at the end of 52 weeks, is Tuesday, March 24th, right? It's at this point that we reach the 365th day, or Wednesday, March 25th. What we are looking for to balance the time is the answer to a simple question. Is this the Wednesday on or after vernal equinox? Has the vernal equinox happened by this day or not? Our own calendar tells us absolutely that it is, but anciently they would need 2 witnesses, which is why we went through that 2-witness rule earlier. And they would need to use Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning to collect their witnesses to prove that yes, indeed, the spring has happened. That being the case, because we know the vernal equinox has already happened before that Wednesday, Moses' calendar would point back to Wednesday, March 25th as New Year's Day, the start of year number 2. Now we're going to speed it up. We'll just advance 364 days in the year number 2 to Tuesday, March 23rd. The next day, March 24th, is also the Wednesday on or after vernal equinox. So now year 2 is ended, and this is New Year's Day for year 3. Year 3 will also end 364 days later. It'll be on a Tuesday, March 22nd. Like the other years, the next day, March 23rd, is the Wednesday on or after vernal equinox, and therefore it is the start of year number 4. But remember what I said about the 4th year, right? Because there is a leap year, February 29th, that will affect the number of days that we subtract. Because instead of having 365 days, we've got an extra one, 366. So we will subtract 3 days instead of 2. And that, and that's just, the number of whole days is constant. This is just reflecting the math in our Gregorian calendar. In any case, year 4 will end Tuesday, March 20th. The next day, Wednesday, March 21st, is the Wednesday on or after vernal equinox, but just barely. Again, by ancient method, 2 astronomical witnesses would call the vernal equinox by Friday morning. So then Wednesday, March 21st, is New Year's Day for year 5. Okay? Year 5 is the last one we'll be looking at. But in year 5, we run into a slight problem because 364 days later is now March 19th. Tuesday, March 19th. In this case, even by Friday dawn, March 21st, there will not be 2 witnesses to say the spring has happened. There might be 1, but not 2. So now the calendar will add a leap week. It will shift to Wednesday, March 26th, which is the day that we started our count. Okay? And that 5-year count will be stable over the millennia. Now, occasionally, thinking about how the ancients did astronomy, they might have observed something which in their minds would trump what the math expects. That doesn't matter. The process will still work. And the point is that the scripture will inform Moses exactly how to mathematically approximate the solar year. And then once these days run out, you may have noticed, the years will become balanced as the sun returned to its 0 point. But the years themselves must be balanced through several methods and configurations. Which brings us to years. The Hebrew word for year is shana, which comes from a root that means both repetition and shining. That's very interesting. Shining repetition, shining cycles. So I think that is a hint that we're talking about a cycle of lights, the cycle of the sun, because the moon does not have any light. It only has the light that the sun gives it. And of course, if we know that, Father Yah knows that. So here is how the year balances itself. Think of it as a series of concentric circles that must be solved, one at a time. The outermost circle is that of the 364 official days. 52 weeks that must complete before any other parts of the year finish. This is also the completion of the luminary count, which runs Wednesday to Tuesday. But the real week, of course, runs Sunday to Saturday. So in order to balance the real week, the Saturday after week 52 counts as the first Sabbath of the new year. In other words, to balance by the actual week, when you run out of your 52 weeks, whether you're adding a leap week or not, that Saturday, let's say you don't add a leap week. That Saturday counts as the first Shabbat of the new year. Now let's say you do add a week. Then that same Saturday in between week 52 and 53 would be the start of the first real week in the new year. Either way, with the actual week count now synced to the new year, the middle circle to resolve is that of the solar year. This circle is dealt with when we find the Wednesday on or after vernal equinox, which we've been discussing this mechanism. Then the innermost circle to resolve is that of the lunar year, and that's done by finding the new moon nearest the start of spring. Basically, this means that the new moon, which is 2 weeks or less, either before or after vernal equinox, which is usually on March 21st. So if a new moon happens on March 10th, it's 11 days before spring. That's your first lunar month of the new year. But a new moon can also be on April 2nd and still be closest to the time of vernal equinox on March 21st as well. So, as we wrap up here, it's like a very intricate pocket watch. We have cycles within other cycles, all independently doing their counts and calculations, and yet also working together at the same time. With these in place, it then becomes very easy for Moses to schedule feasts by new or full moon that also keep proper time with the seasons as well. Let me show you what it looks like as we conclude. Summing it all up. Here's your watch. There are your hours in the day. Your 364 official days, your 52 weeks per year. Then you are counting your days Wednesday to Tuesday for the luminary count. And at the same time, you're doing a Shabbat count, Sunday to Saturday. Your year balances through heavenly signs, like we mentioned, such as, the sun rising at 90 degrees, setting at 270 degrees, fixed stars like the Pleiades. It's regulated by the golden cycle of the sun overall, synchronized by the signs of the stars like the Pleiades, which I just mentioned also, resting in Almighty Yah's, Father Yahweh's hands. So thank you very much for listening. I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth. For more information about teachings like this, to find out more about subscribing to our weekly Torah and New Testament teachings, please go to www.onefaith.onepeopleministries.com. And you'll find free teachings there. Some of those are teachings about the biblical feasts and so on. Others are teachings about calendar, like this one. And you can find out, if you like, how to become a monthly or an annual subscriber. The only thing I ask is that you do not make any financial transactions on the Shabbat day from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. So if you also have any questions about this, if you want to find out some more about the other PowerPoints that may be available, then you might want to write me at onefaithandrew@gmail.com. That's ONEFAITHANDREW@gmail.com. Until then, I'll just thank you for listening to this teaching, which was a bit longer than some of the other Walking Dedicated Men series, but I think very important. I'll just say thank you for bearing with me and hearing me out. And as we always like to say at One Faith, One People Ministries, I will just say shalom. Take care.